everybody, welcome to episode 6 of Pins and Needles. My name is Zoe. You can find me on Ravelry as BFG and on Instagram as Pins and Needles UK. This is my crafty podcast all about my knitting and sewing adventures, and I'm coming to you from South Wales in the UK. It is a particularly fine example of a Welsh summer's day. It's grey, drizzly and very windy, so really feeling the summer vibes at the moment. Welcome back to any returning subscribers and a big hello to anybody new. My last episode 2 weeks ago, I had 97 subscribers and I was really keen to reach 100. And I promised that I would do a little giveaway if I made that magic number. Well, I'm thrilled to say that as of this morning, I'm up to 157 subscribers. Mwah! Thank you all so much for subscribing. I can't believe it's been such a massive jump in just 2 weeks. So, as promised, I will be doing a little giveaway. I've managed to assemble the prizes. I did show these last time as a little fun notebook. And some little sheepy buttons by Injabulo. Those are ceramic ones. And I also had enormous fun winding up some mini skeins for you. Not sure how best to show these. There they are, look. These two you might recognise from my Colour Affection shawl. The dark purple here, that's Travel Knitter in Highlands, which is an exclusive 2016 colourway for the Edinburgh Yarn Festival. And this multi is from, it's Araucania multi, but I can't remember the colourway number, I'll put that in the notes. But yeah, these were in my Colour Affection shawl. You might recognise this one from my zigzagular socks. This is Lorna's Laces Shepherd Sock Multi in Bittersweet. This one I knit a Star Shower cowl out of, and that is, I can't remember the name of this yarn. It's in my Ravelry project page though, so if you're interested in that one, do go and have a look. We've got some sparkly sock yarn. This is a cranberry colourway and it's from Owl About Yarn. I made my mum a nice pair of cable socks from that. And this is some yarn from my other yarn dyer friend, Ellie, and she is on Etsy as Tithen Bryn. She's quite busy with a new baby at the moment, so I'm not sure how much is in her shop, but this is some lovely yellow yarn, and I knit myself some gorgeous socks from those, so there's a skein of that. And then this is some Norro Silk Garden sock. Each of these skeins, it's about 5 to 6 grams-ish, so skeins. So yes, thank you all for subscribing. If you would like to be entered into the giveaway for mini skeins and sheepy buttons and that little notebook, all you have to do is leave me a comment in the drop down box at the bottom of this video just saying hello and yes please, I'd like to enter the competition. I will draw the winner using random number generator and announce the winner on the next episode in 2 weeks' time. And I'll contact the winner and get these all sent out to you. So yes, leave me a comment saying you'd like to enter and cross your fingers and hope you win. Right, so first of all, what I'm wearing, this is one of my favourite shawls. I can't believe I'm having to wear it in the middle of July. This is the Rock Island shawl, which is a Jared Flood pattern, part of Brooklyn Tweed. And it's knit, I don't know if you can see, the light's blowing out a bit. It's knit in the most beautiful yarn. It's Wagtail, hang on a sec, I wrote this down. Wagtail yarns, 100% fine kid mohair. Oh, look, that just shows up against the white mantelpiece. And you start by knitting the border. It needs a bit of a reblock. It's got a zigzag border, and then you pick up all the way down here and knit from the bottom up, and it's got a sort of a net section here, and then this top bit is garter. And I'm wearing a very lovely shawl pin given to me by my friend Claire. She's on Ravelry as Malcat. Hi Claire. So yes, I need this today for the snuggles because it's cold and windy and just it's miserable, so that's what's keeping me warm. As usual, it's been a pretty frantic 2 weeks. Jocelyn had her dance show. My daughter takes part in like a drama group at the community centre next door, and they put on a big performance of Grease. So we went to see that, which was tons of fun. I also suffered a rather terrible injury. I'm not going to lie, it took me out for a couple of days. Look what I did to my thumb. Look! I was opening a tin of corned beef for the children's sandwiches and slipped, and I took an enormous chunk out of my thumb. It bled for an entire day, and it still keeps bleeding now. I probably should have got stitches, to be honest. And because it's right on the top of my thumb, it's really interfered with my knitting. And it's also right where you hold the head of a pin to try and push a pin through fabric. So that's been a bit of a... well, I've had to work my way around my baddie thumb. But anyway, nearly better, so that's okay. One of my guys at work has been on leave for a week, so I've had some extra shifts or some longer shifts. But that has meant I've been able to get back to my training properly at the gym, so that was quite good. I've started a new strength training program that Dave wrote for me. I am desperate to be able to do a chin-up, just one chin-up. So he's written me a fantastic new program, but I've been out of training for a couple of weeks with tonsillitis and all sorts of things. So getting back into it, and I'm starting to lift heavy weights again and do lots of body weight exercises. It's making my hands quite sore and achy. So between tired hands and lacerated thumb and all the rest of it, I'm afraid there hasn't been a huge amount of crafting time. So if this episode is a little bit thin on content and it's just mostly me showing you the same old things, I do apologise. Hopefully things will calm down a bit. The kids break up from school Wednesday of next week, so I should have less dashing around to do and hopefully a bit more sober time. Oh, I forgot to say, I'm recording this on Friday the 15th of July. Normally I do record on a Saturday, but I'm off on a yarny adventure late tonight with Jenny from All About Yarn. So I was going to record today, and hopefully I will have time to put all the show notes and things in the bar at the bottom, and then I can just upload it before I go and publish tomorrow. So bear with me, hopefully I'll have time to get all of that done. Do check the drop down box at the bottom. I put details of all of the patterns and the yarn, and anything that I mentioned goes in there. I also include timings for the different sections of my podcast, so if you want to skip any parts or go back to them, you can check down there and it'll give you some timing suggestions. Okay, first up, pins, my sewing section. I've got a couple of acquisitions to show you. I mentioned last week that, was it not last week, last episode I think, that I treated myself to a new duvet cover and pillowcase set, which meant that I could put my old one into my fabric stash. And I'd forgotten to bring it down to show you, so I brought that down. And here it is. So there's the bit that's starting to go a bit scraggy. Can you see all the fabric strips are starting to come off? But mostly it's this lovely plum cotton colour, and we have a king-size bed, so I've got huge amounts of fabric. So yes, that's my new stash acquisition. It's a gorgeous colour. I think it quite suits me, and I've got lots of it, so I'll have to think of something exciting to make with that. And then my mum found me some vintage pillowcases. I think I should maybe change the name of my blog to From Sheets to Chic or something, because all my fabric seems to be bedding at the moment. Anyway, she's given me 2 of these rather marvellous flowery pillowcases. You actually get quite a lot of fabric in a pillowcase, particularly if you think about the tuck on the inside. You get another good 6 inches out of that. And Jocelyn is in need of new pyjamas, so I thought 1 pillowcase would be plenty for pyjama shorts, and then I'll try and find a teenage tank top pattern to go with the top. She's a slightly difficult size at the moment. She's very tall for her age, so she often needs to have a woman's adult size for the length of things, but of course being 10 she hasn't got a chest yet, so I can't just use a lady's tank top pattern. I might just draw around one of her current t-shirts and then make my own pattern for that. Progress on my trousers. I was trying to sew myself a pair of Simplicity 1887 summery trousers. I was making this one here. I showed you my finished practice toile last episode, and if you remember, they fitted nicely around the hips and bum, but were too big in the waist, and yet I was having trouble pulling them over my hips. The circumference of the waistband fabric was just fractionally too small to be comfortable getting them on, but then because I'm such a pear shape, they were too big at the top. Anyway, plenty of you were kind enough to give me some suggestions, and a lot of it seemed to be take the elastic waist out and put in a side zip. Excellent suggestion. I'm not sure I'm quite up for that yet, to be honest. So what I did was, the pattern has a standard seam allowance of 5/8 of an inch. Excuse me. So I took the waistband off my toile, I disassembled it, and then I took a broader seam allowance of 3/8 of an inch at the top of the trouser and on the waistband, sewed it back together, tried it on, and it's fine. It's not great, but it's much better, and I can just yank the elastic in a bit as well. I did manage to get as far as cutting out my actual fabric. Which way up is this? Here we are. So this is one of the trouser fronts, if you remember seeing this fabric, and I've managed to get as far as sewing in the pleats on the front, but that's as far as I managed, I'm afraid. If you remember, when I was sewing my Bettine dress, it was rayon fabric, and it was the first time I'd used it, and I really struggled to cut out accurately. Well, for my trousers, I had a grand plan. I jumped on the internet and found some blog articles about cutting slippery fabrics. I can't remember which ones, but if you just Google it, I'm sure you could find them. I think there was one from Colette. They're a great source of tips and tricks. So I read all of those, and they suggested rotary cutters, which I've got one, but I don't have a board big enough for cutting out trouser pieces, and super sharp pins and all this kind of stuff. So what I did is I cut my fabric out on my dining room table, and for day-to-day use I have an oilcloth tablecloth on there, nice flowery pattern. Jim the dog likes to sit on my dining room table and look out of the front windows, so given that my table often has had a dog's bottom on it all day, I like the fact that I can bleach that down before we eat. Anyway, so normally I have a plastic tablecloth on there, but this time I got a fabric tablecloth and put that on the top, and then I put my rayon fabric on top of the tablecloth fabric, and it just cut down on the sideways movement a huge amount. It made it much easier, and the fabric stayed put. So that lent me a lot more stability, and then when I put the pattern pieces on the top, I pinned the pattern pieces to the fabric and also to the tablecloth, so that when I was using my scissors, when you cut with scissors, it does slightly lift the fabric, and that can make it a little inaccurate as well. So by pinning the pattern to the fabric and the tablecloth, it stopped the fabric sliding away from the scissor blades. So that went a lot more easily this time round, so I feel that my pattern pieces are quite a bit more accurate, so that was encouraging. As I said, I managed to sew the front pleats on the two front sections, and the next bit that you sew, they have a pocket, and you attach the pocket bag down here, flip it to the wrong side, sew it down, and then on the wrong side you fold the pocket in half that way, so the half of the pocket remains on the inside of the pocket bag, and the other half squares off this corner here and is also part of the front facing. And when I did manage to snatch a little sewing time the other day, I put the wrong pocket bag on the wrong trouser front. so I spent ages trying to work out why my pockets were not going right, and it's because I had the wrong one. So I ripped all of that out using my super fancy new stitch ripper, and then I completely ran out of time to get any more progress. So I'm sorry these aren't done. You are probably pretty fed up of me still talking about trousers that I haven't finished. I'm a bit fed up as well. But the reason these aren't finished, I had a whole day at home and my plan was to get those finished. I wanted them ready to wear this weekend. And I was walking my children to school that morning, and Max, my youngest son, said to me, "Mummy, I need an Anglo-Saxon costume for tomorrow." Wow. Now, to be fair, he's in an end-of-school play, and they've been doing Romans as a topic. So they've got a play that they're putting on about Boudica, and some of the kids are Romans and some are Anglo-Saxons. So Max was an Anglo-Saxon. And I've had plenty of notice to find him a costume. I don't quite know what happened. I didn't think he needed it until Monday, but of course they needed it for the dress rehearsal. So one of his teachers, the very lovely Jane Evans, who I know watches this podcast, so hi Jane, had very kindly given everyone a sheet of pictures as to what Anglo-Saxons were supposed to be wearing. So my sewing day got totally hijacked in a desperate attempt to sew a 9-year-old Anglo-Saxon outfit using only what I already had. We only have one car and my husband had the car at work. So literally I had what I had in the house, anything I could get from the corner shop, and about 4 hours to do it in. So it was like my very own Great British Sewing Bee alteration challenge in the end. I found my old Bettine dress toile, if you remember that. It was just cream cotton fabric that I got from IKEA. And basically, I measured Max briefly, and I just took the side seams in 10 tons, and I had some fancy fabric scraps that I attached to the arms to make a nice cuff, filled in the neckline with some more fabric, chopped the hem off the bottom, and I found an old brown towel and some cord and made him a cloak. So he's taken that outfit into school for his dress rehearsal, so I will try and show you next time if he brings it back from school. But I put a picture at the start in the credits, so you can always have a look at Max. He also has his toy sword, and he wanted to paint his face blue because apparently Anglo-Saxons painted their faces blue. So that was my sewing progress has been rather lacking, so my apologies for that. The other thing I wanted to mention, I'm a big fan of Katie of Inside Number 23 podcast, and she is hosting a sew-along. She put a video up just the other day about fabric choices, and the pattern they are making is the Hollyburn skirt, which is a Sewaholic pattern. So if any of you it's quite an easy pattern, so if any of you are considering dipping your toes into garment making, why not check out Inside Number 23, either her podcast or she has a Ravelry group. The sew-along starts in August, so there's plenty of time to get fabric and patterns and have a think about what you're doing. So dash over there and join in if you need a bit of cheering on with your sewing. Right, well, on to needles, the knitting bit. I have an acquisition. I am cold sheeping, I have not bought yarn, but what I did buy was an absolutely gorgeous project bag. I have been making my own project bags and they're okay, but they're not fantastic. I treated myself to a Mrs. Brown's bag a few weeks ago, and then I've started following the very lovely Emma of Eldenwood Crafts. Hi Emma. I follow her on Instagram, and I really love the things that she makes. and I saw her post about a shop update, and I just couldn't resist this bag. I don't know if the camera's going to blow that out. It's got bees and dragonflies, and then you can't quite see it, but sort of here it's got ghost images of bees and dragonflies, and a lovely teal canvas bottom. Look how, oh sorry, that's my bit of thread, not hers. Look how perfect her corner seams are. Look, absolutely spot on. A nice cream zip on the top, and it's really squishy. I think she must use quite a nice interfacing. Maybe it's padding, like wadding, you know, with quilting rather than interfacing. I'm not sure. And inside is her lovely Eldenwood Craft label and really nice bluey grey check cotton fabric. So this was my purchase. I absolutely love it, and should finances allow, I will definitely be making another purchase. Right, so this contains my, I can never remember the name, excuse me, my Driftwood socks. Now, this is part of a pattern range designed by Mina, Philipp of the Knitting Expat podcast. It's all available on Ravelry. And I have a half-finished object. When I showed you these last time, I was halfway through the heel flap. I went back to basics, heel flap and gusset on these. The yarn, I've managed to find the label actually. Here we are. There we are. Miju wools, wool and nylon sock yarn in the colourway Autumn Leaves. Now, I love the colourway. I really like it. It's these gorgeous berry tones with sort of patches of green and a little bit of burnt orange. It doesn't really say autumn leaves to me, but I do really enjoy the yarn. I knitted these on 2.25mm needles, which is my standard sock needle size. This yarn is slightly thinner than some, so I went for the 72 stitch cast on, and it was actually looking a little bit big. The pattern, if you can see, I won't reveal the pattern details, but you end up passing a stitch over, and I was a little bit worried that that might draw the sock in, so I went for the 72 stitch, and it came out a bit too big. So it's not a problem, but when I was decreasing for the gusset, I decreased down, what did I decrease down to? 68, I think. And as the obviously the sole is in plain stocking stitch, so it doesn't notice, and it just means that the part of the sock that's going to be in my shoe is a slightly snugger fit. This has been my travel knitting and my work knitting, and I managed to get quite a bit done. And one evening I had a careful measure and decided that my foot was long enough, so I did the toe, kitchened the end, tried it on, and it was too short. So I don't quite know what happened there. I just didn't measure the sock correctly, or I thought my foot was shorter than it is. So I found the cardboard cutout of my foot that I'd made for the fish lips kiss heel, poked it into my sock, and sure enough, I hadn't knitted the foot long enough. So I had to rip the toe back out. I think I added another ½ inch and then closed the toe. So I've knitted the toe of this one twice. I cast on the second sock straight away. There we are, look. And that's how far I've got with the second one. With my travel socks, I don't always use my nicest stitch markers, and this is just a little plastic rubbery hairband from a shop in the UK called Claire's Accessories, and you can get a packet of about 50 of them for £2.50. So if they ping off on the train, I don't worry that I've lost one of my nice ones. Anyway, so yes, that's my sock progress. I'm pretty sure I'll have those finished by the next time we see each other. And they live in my gorgeous bag from Eldenwood Crafts. So I'm really enjoying knitting along on those. My other work in progress, oh, it's all escaping in my basket, is my Epistrophy cardigan by Kate Davies Designs from her book Yokes. Now, a yoked cardigan has all the fun at the top, and I'm afraid I'm not at the top yet. So this might be another week of slightly dull updates, but here we are, look. So the stitch marker shows you where I was the last time. I cast on in the contrast cream colourway. There's the beaded rib. So I've knit 15 inches of stocking stitch, and I've put 8 stitches at each underarm on some waste yarn, and just used the end caps to secure it on my cable needle. So when I come to add the sleeves in and do the yoke, it's all ready to go. I'm not mucking about with too much waste yarn. So yes, that's the body of my jumper finished. I have to do the sleeves next. I was a little bit worried about yarn quantities and if I was going to have enough, but I've got 6 balls left. So I've got 2 balls per sleeve, which is 4, and then I've got another 2 to do the yoke and the button band. So I'm pretty confident I'll be all right now. So that was good fun knitting as well. That's it for my needle section. I told you it was going to be a bit thin on content, I'm afraid. My last section is my Two's Company section, which is where I just point you in the direction of some other blogs or podcasts that I think you might be interested in. My last one was mostly knitting related things, and this one is mostly sewing actually. The first blog I wanted to mention to you is a blog by a lovely American sewer called Ali J. I'll put the website up here, and again it will be down in the show notes. She makes absolutely lovely clothes for herself, and she's particularly fond of vintage patterns. She loves the style of the 60s, so she sews some really lovely things. And I subscribe to her on Blog Loving, the blog reading app that I have on my computer. Anyway, she recently did an interview with, and I'm going to have to check the name here, Deborah Kryling from Simplicity. Now, if you're into sewing, you may well have noticed that recently Simplicity have been re-releasing some vintage patterns from their archives. I think they're released about 65 so far, and they span all the way from the 1920s up to the 1970s. And Gertie of Gertie's Sewing Blog, she's been working with them and doing some contemporary versions as well. So yes, Ali interviewed this lady from Simplicity about how they select which vintage patterns to reissue, what sort of changes they have to make to the patterns, if they've noticed any trends in different people buying the vintage patterns to the more modern ones. It's a really fascinating blog article, so I'd go and find that if you've got a spare 5 minutes. Unfortunately, it isn't formatted terribly well. There are no paragraphs in it, so it's a bit of a wall of text, and it's hard to tell which are the questions and which are the answers. But it's a really interesting read, so do go along and have a read of that. They talk a little bit about sizing of patterns, both the difference between vintage and modern, and the huge amounts of ease that modern sewing patterns seem to have. And they mention things like with the 1940s patterns, they have to remove a lot of ease from the shoulders because they all used to wear shoulder pads, and we're not so keen. It's not the 80s anymore, or indeed the 40s. So yes, do go and have a look at that. That was good fun. The next one I wanted to mention was an article that I saw on Seamwork. I've mentioned Seamwork before. It's an online subscription-based sewing magazine. It's www.seamwork.com, and for $6 a month you get one issue which contains half a dozen articles, and every month there's 2 free patterns, and they give you credits, 2 credits a month. Every pattern is 1 credit, and you can spend your credits on any patterns you like from that issue or from previous issues, and they do have some fabulous choices. Anyway, in the June 2016 episode of Seamwork, they had an article entitled Who Taught You? And it was quite a short article just covering how modern sewists got into the craft. And just sort of anecdotally, it seems to be that sewing and also other crafting has almost skipped a generation. So a lot of people were talking about how their mothers didn't sew and didn't knit, but their grandmothers did. And just that it's nice that crafting has helped bridge a gap between two generations. And she just talks about how the online community and sharing with older generations, sharing knowledge, sharing tips, making things for each other, making things for your grandchildren, just brings a richness and a closeness to the sewing community. So that's worth a read. And it's not quite true for me personally. My mother is a very good sewer and a good knitter as well, as is my grandmother. I remember my grandma teaching me to sew. Teaching me to knit rather. I was about 8, and I was sat in the corner of the dining room, and I had a bag with about 5 or 6 different balls of yarn, and I was going to knit my dad a scarf. And I remember how many holes and dropped stitches it had in it. And when I finished it, I decided to give it to him for his birthday, which is in June. And I remember it was supposed to be a scarf, and I remember him putting it on, and it was so short he really had to pull to fold it over and tuck it into his coat. But he very kindly wore that scarf to and from work, well, at least in and out of the house, for quite a few weeks afterwards. So that's how I learnt to knit from my grandmother. Unfortunately, she doesn't knit so much anymore. She's had a stroke and a couple of falls, and her eyesight's failing, and she's lost some of the manual dexterity that she used to have. So she still knits blanket squares and things like that, but nothing terribly complicated anymore. It was my mum that taught me to sew. My mum used to sew a lot of her own clothes in her youth. She sewed her own wedding dress and wedding cape, which I remember hanging up in a closet when I was younger. And she used to make lots of clothes for my brother and I. Have you heard of a company called Cloth Kits? They've been going for years, and she used to use their patterns and things to sew us items. And I remember her sewing and knitting when I was a child, and she had a white wooden chest, and all of her fabrics and knitting needles and things lived in that chest, and it had a lovely smell. So I remember getting into trouble as a child. She left some fabric out on the dining room table. You know that lovely scrunch noise that fabric makes when you cut through it with scissors? I remember getting into a lot of trouble because I just couldn't stop cutting the fabric because it made such a nice noise. So I obviously destroyed a dress's worth of fabric. So sorry about that, Mum. Anyway, so when I started to get back into sewing, I would buy a pattern and some fabric, and then the next time my mum came down to visit, she'd spend some time with me, and she taught me the basics of pattern cutting and getting around a sewing machine and things like that. So that's how I got into sewing. And I think that because I've been so keen on sewing and knitting as well as an adult, it's helped her rediscover a bit of interest in it. She doesn't have a huge amount of spare time, but she does do some lovely knitting. She likes little toys and ornaments and things like that. And she does seem to enjoy helping me when I have sewing projects to do. So yes, have a look at that Seamwork article, June 2016, Who Taught You? That was quite fun. And then, oh yeah, hello there. A slight interruption when Dave came home from work and Jim the dog went nuts. The last bit I wanted to mention in my Two's Company section is an interview, well, 2 interviews with Kate Davies, the same lady that designed my Epistrophy cardigan that I'm working on. She appeared in an interview on BBC Radio 4 Women's Hour, July the 11th. It's a short 9-minute interview, and it's about 36% of the way into the podcast, so you can skip the first section and go straight to Kate Davies's interview. I've briefly mentioned her academic career and her interest in women's literature of the 18th and 19th centuries, but she also suffered a very serious stroke in her 30s. And in this Women's Hour interview, she just touches on her journey from near paralysis down her left-hand side, regaining her manual dexterity and becoming one of the UK's most well-known knitwear designers, and a small business owner, and how she's conquered her personal issues and is still trying to conquer them, and yet makes a fantastic living designing and producing yarn. There is a much longer interview with her with Jo Milmine of the Shiny Bees podcast, and that's episode 34. And she talks quite a bit more about the role that women's home-based crafting played in the social and economic history of Britain, and the feminist issues surrounding that. So if you fancy a bit more of an in-depth look at her work and her views on crafting and history, then do give those a listen. Right, well that's it for this week. I just wanted to remind you that Jenny and I will be at the Yarningham Wool Festival in Sturchley Baths, Birmingham, Saturday the 16th, Sunday the 17th, so that's tomorrow and the day after. Come along if you're in the Midlands, come and say hello, have a shop in the marketplace. Tickets are £5 from the internet in advance and £7 on the door. I'll be back in 2 weeks, hopefully with finished socks and wearing my fancy new summer trousers, because I'm really bored of talking about them and not wearing them. So yes, that's it. Happy knitting, happy sewing. Give me a thumbs up if you like the video, and please remember to click the subscribe button, the top right hand button of your screen, and check the drop down notes for any of the details that you might have missed. And if you're interested in entering that competition, just leave me a note in the comments saying that you'd like to be entered, and I'll announce the results next time I podcast. All right then, happy knitting, happy crafting, and I'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye.